This episode is brought to you by SAP Concur. As a new cohort of workers enters the hybrid workforce, they wield immense power in shaping the next era of work during a time of ongoing change. Employers are realizing that they must respond to employees' needs and expectations if they want to remain competitive in the job market. Technology can fuel productivity, flexibility, and employee satisfaction. SAP Concur solutions help companies reinvent travel, expense, and invoice management by simplifying everyday processes and creating better experiences across organizations. You'll move beyond yesterday's tedious tasks to confidently manage employee spend with innovative and intuitive solutions that are powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning. Learn more about SAP Concur travel, expense, and invoice solutions at concur.com. That's CONCUR.com.
Regret is in some ways kind of elusive because at the start it's an emotion. So that's the thing to understand. It's an emotion, it's a feeling, and it's a negative emotion. It's an emotion that makes us feel worse, not better. That's really important. But it's also as much a process as an emotion. So it's a process by which we go back in time. We think about a decision we made or an action we took or a decision we didn't make or an action we didn't take and wish we had done things differently. And a reason we wish we had done things differently is we feel that if we had done things differently, the present would be better.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leading the Future of Work. My guest today, Dan Pink, best-selling author of numerous books, including When and Drive. And he has a brand new book out called The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. Daniel Pink, thank you for joining.
Jacob Morgan, thank you for having me.
And do you prefer Daniel or Dan?
Either one.
Okay. So very first question for you, and I think you've talked about this a little bit before, but why did you decide to write this book? Because you've covered a lot of different topics during the course of your career. Why focus on regret?
Well, the short answer is that I had regrets, and I wanted to try to make sense of them. And I found that when I began talking with people about my regrets, I got a kind of reaction that is really interesting for a writer, and that people were leaning in. They were very keen to talk about this, which was a great surprise given that we tend to be kind of, I don't want to talk about regrets. Regrets are taboo. What I found is that the taboo was paper thin, and that people actually did want to talk about that. And that's always a promising topic for a writer.
I saw an interview that you did where you talked about what some of your regrets are, but it seemed like most of the regrets were around you seeing things happening in your past and not kind of speaking up about them. Is there like a specific moment or a very specific regret that you have that you can point to?
Well, they're all. I mean, there are certain jobs. There are a couple of jobs that I took that I wish I hadn't taken. My first job out of college was a complete fucking disaster, so I regret taking that. There's another job that I took that was a complete colossal failure, and I really regret taking that. So those are two things. I think the ones that you're talking about, Jacob, are regrets that I talked about kindness, about being in situations where, I can remember a situation in college where, somebody was sort of treated very, very rudely, and I thought, and I knew that it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. This person. So I again, without going into all of the details, because I don't want to betray anybody's privacy, but there's so many instances where, that's the sad part, is there's so many of them where I saw people not being treated well, people being excluded, people not being treated fairly, and I saw it. That's the thing. I can't deny that. I didn't see anything, and I also can't say, I didn't know it was wrong. I saw it and I knew it was wrong and I didn't do a thing, and that's vexing to me.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird question for you. What exactly is a regret? Because I think we all have those experiences of like, I wish I would have done that. I wish this would have been different. Are regrets that simple in nature? Like they don't have to be like these deep, profound, life-changing. It's just something that you wish would have gone differently. Would that classify as a regret?
Sort of. I mean, it's a great question, and regret is in some ways kind of elusive because at the start it's an emotion.
Yeah.
So that's the thing to understand. It's an emotion. It's a feeling, and it's a feeling. It's a negative emotion. It's an emotion that makes us feel worse, not better. That's really important. But it's also as much a process as an emotion. So it's a process by which we go back in time. We think about a decision we made or an action we took or a decision we didn't make or an action we didn't take and wish we had done things differently. And a reason we wish we had done things differently is we feel that if we had done things differently, the present would be better. So that makes it incredibly cognitively complex because what you're doing is you're doing mental time travel. You're going back in time. That's amazing in itself that we can do that in our brains and minds. That's amazing right there. But what we can also do is actually change the course of events back there in our head and then get back in our time machine, return to the present and say, wait, the present would be different if I had reconfigured the past. So it's an emotion that makes us feel bad when we look back and say, oh, if only I had done that or hadn't done that. But it also shows incredible cognitive muscularity and dexterity. I mean, almost an unfathomable, breathtaking amount of cognitive firepower.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So I'm working on a new book now on vulnerability, specifically in leadership. And so I've been interviewing a lot of business leaders, and I talked to a couple researchers. And there was a study that was done a little while ago by a professor named Anna Bruck. And we were talking about vulnerability, and she has this concept that she coined a beautiful mess effect. And now it's specifically related to vulnerability, but it's this idea that when you imagine somebody else being vulnerable, you tend to ascribe more positive attributes to them. Oh, that person is brave, they're courageous. But when you think about yourself, you think more in terms of negative. But she also applied it to time. And she said that when we think about something very concrete, let's say you're going on a vacation, if you think about, the vacation is a year down the road, you have all these great images in your mind, right? And you think about very abstract things. I'm going to lay on the beach, I'm going to hang out. But the closer the time horizon is, the more specific things get. Like, I got to pack my passport, I got to check in for my flight. And there too, she found that when we try to think of longer time horizons or longer periods, sometimes we can be a little bit more negative. And when we think about the more shorter time horizon, I think she said we can be a little bit more optimistic. I forgot what the technical term for that was, but not directly related, but just something that I found tangentially related to some of the stuff that you're focusing on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, some of it is a form of pluralistic ignorance. So so basically, and pluralistic ignorance is when we believe something, but we think no one else believes it. Because we think that we're somehow singular. So if we say, if person X revealed their vulnerabilities, Dan, would you think less of them or more of them? And I'd say I might think more of them because they showed courage. Well, what if you revealed your vulnerabilities? Oh, everybody would think I was a wimp and a loser, and so we don't, so we have that. The other thing is that for Anna Bruck's work is also, there's even a sturdier finding from years and years ago. I think it was Elliot Aronson who talked about something called the pratfall effect. That when people are a legendary social psychologist, and it's pretty simple. It's essentially that if you have people, let's say that you're a distinguished professor. Let's say you're a Nobelist and you're giving a lecture and you drop your clicker or you spill coffee on yourself. You would think, oh my God, people actually don't think, oh my God, this person's a freaking loser and incompetent. It actually heightens your appeal.
Yeah. I think I remember seeing some of those studies. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating how the brain works and how we think about these things and the relation they have with each other. Okay, so speaking of regret, I know one of the things that you've talked about quite a bit is the no regrets mantra is a bad one to live by, which is completely counterintuitive to what we've always heard, right? Live a life where you don't have any regrets, where you don't want to look back and say, I wish I would have done that. Why is that such a bad way to live?
Well, I mean, trying to reduce future regrets is not a bad way to live if you do it right. Saying that I never look backward and that when I look backward, I don't have any regrets because that's what got me where I am today. And that never acknowledging your mistakes and always being positive and always looking forward and never looking backward is dangerous. It's wrong-headed. So the idea that you should never look backward, which is what the no regrets philosophy says. No, don't look back. Nope, nothing you can do about it. Don't look back. Always look forward. Don't dwell on the negative. Nope, got to be positive. That is a recipe. That is not an effective. First of all, it goes against the science because what the science tells us is that everybody has regrets. So you're actually going profoundly against human nature. The second thing about that is that it's a bad idea for effective living. What we know from a pile of research is that if we shouldn't ignore our regrets, we shouldn't wallow in our regrets. We should just confront them. When we confront them, listen to them, learn from them, use them as data, use them as information, they are a powerfully transformative emotion. They can help us become better negotiators, better decision makers, better problem solvers, better strategists, better parents, find more meaning. And so, we've sort of been sold a bill of goods that when we say no regrets, I don't have any regrets. I never look back. I always look forward. I never am negative. I'm always positive. That's delusional.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's something I struggle with sometimes too, right? I try to be optimistic, and if things are not going well, I'm sometimes in that mentality of like forget about the regrets. But I realize, of course, like I'm sure a lot of people do that. That's not not a very effective way to live.
Optimism is a good thing.
Yeah.
Positive emotions are good things. They're not the only thing.
Yeah.
If you are optimistic all the time, you're going to get yourself in trouble. If you have positive emotions all the time, you're not going to live a full life. There's a whole line of research on what's called defensive pessimism. Sometimes it's actually helpful to be somewhat pessimistic. Not all the time, not most of the time, but sometimes. The idea that you should be uniformly optimistic in all circumstances is delusional. The idea that we should have plenty of positive emotions. I want you, Jacob, to have lots of positive emotions. I want to have positive emotions. But we don't want to have only positive emotions. Imagine if I said to you, you know what? You want only positive emotions? I'll tell you what, I'm going to do a little operation. I'm going to banish your ability to feel fear. That's a negative emotion. You want to live without being able to feel fear?
No.
Do you?
No,
Why?
I don't think so.
If I eliminate your... No, but why?
I think fear has helped me in a lot of different ways. So for example, speaking, writing books, I think the fear helps me perform better. I think fear helps me overcome obstacles I probably wouldn't overcome. I think it helps me grow and do things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to put it. The other thing is that if you don't have the ability to feel fear, what's going to happen when you're in a burning building?
Yeah.
You'll die, right? So there's a reason we have fear. There's a reason we grieve. Why do we grieve? Why do we experience a horrible feeling of grief? Because we love. If we eliminate grief, it actually makes love, I think, a little bit more challenging. So negative. So again, I'm not saying we should. Again, I don't want people to wallow in their regrets. No way. That's terrible. That's a disaster. Yeah. But I don't want people to ignore their regrets either, because that's really bad advice. And we've gotten some really bad advice on that front.
Let's talk a little bit about the research that went into the book, just to give people some context. I know you collected thousands of stories. So share a little bit about what went into writing this book as far as your World Regret Survey that you did.
Well, I did two pieces of research. One was the American Regret Project, which was a giant public opinion survey of the U.S. population. We sampled 4,489 Americans, a very rigorous public opinion survey, the largest survey of American attitudes about regret ever conducted. And we did it largely to try to draw some demographic differences, to see if there are demographic differences in the what, why, and how of regret. Then, at the same time, I did a qualitative piece of research, which, as you say, is called the World Regret Survey, which is a giant collection of regrets. So far, we've collected regrets from over 20,000 people in 109 countries.
Wow. So people were just sharing their deepest personal stories with you via email. Oh man.
By a form, by online. They would complete online, a form online at worldregretsurvey.com. Yeah.
So what were some of the types of things that people were sending in as far as regrets? I mean, were these like deep, profound things that people were going through, or were there some?
A lot of them, a lot of them were, and as you know from the book, one of the things that comes out is that around the world, people ended up having basically the same four kinds of regrets. So there were regrets. There were what I call foundation regrets, which are if only I'd done the work, about people regretting not taking care of their health, not working hard enough in school, saving too little, spending too much, things that compromise the stability of your life. There were a lot of regrets about boldness. If only I'd taken the chance. There were regrets about morality. If only I'd done the right thing. And there were a lot of regrets about relationships, not only romantic relationships, in fact, mostly not romantic relationships, but relationships, the full gamut of relationships we have in our lives, which are if only I'd reached out. So around the world, I kept seeing the same four regrets over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talked earlier about this idea of why dwelling on regrets is bad. And I'm sure like intuitively people can hear that and say, oh yeah, of course that doesn't make sense. But why is it bad? And what happens to us when we start to dwell and think about regrets a little bit too long and they, start to take over a little bit?
Because what we want to use regret as a tool. We want to use it as an instrument. We want to use it as an engine. And so if you simply think about it and dwell on it, you're not going through a process that allows you to derive lessons to go forward. You're simply luxuriating in it. All right. And so it's a really profound question, because it goes to, what is the purpose of emotions, particularly negative emotions? All right. So there's one, some of us believe that emotions, like, just forget about them. Like, we should be thinking and not feeling. Forget about emotions. Be rational and don't get swayed by these emotions. I don't think that's right. There's another, I think, even more insidious view that emotions are the only truth. That, like, bask in your emotions, like celebrate your emotions, especially your negative emotions, all the time. I think that's a terrible idea. Feelings are not for ignoring. Feelings are not for feeling. Feeling is for thinking. Feelings are signals that our cognition and our emotion works together. That emotions are signals. They're information. They're data. We should be thinking about them. So when we feel crappy, right, like regret, it's the world is telling us something. Now, if we simply luxuriate in that feeling, if we simply wallow in that feeling, we're not properly receiving the signal. We're we're using it as a bath rather than as a prod. And what we want to do is use this as a way to stir us into thinking and processing and deriving lessons from the regret and then acting on it.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. Why we shouldn't be dwelling on these things a little bit too long. So you talked about these four regrets. I thought maybe we can unpack them a little bit. So foundation, sure. Boldness, and then moral and connection. So let's start with foundation regrets. So maybe you can give us just a background of what those types of regrets are, and then we can look at maybe some action items or things that people can do if they identify those in their lives.
Sure. That's a hard. The foundation regrets are somewhat hard to solve because of the nature of what they are. They're regrets of small decisions that you make early that accumulate to pretty nasty consequences later on. So let's say that let's say that tonight I don't eat very well. All right, I eat terrible food, unhealthy food. Okay, that's not cataclysmic. But if I do that regularly, over and over and over again for years, that's going to catch up to me. All right, that's a foundation. If only I had eaten better. Let's say I don't exercise. If only I'd exercised more. A lot of regrets in this category about finances. If only I'd saved more money and been less frivolous with my money. Not a single person in this database said, "Oh, my regret is that I saved too much money." Nobody has that regret, and I mean that. And so that's what these foundation regrets are: small decisions that happen early. Small decisions you make early that accumulate to pretty, as I said, negative consequences much later in life. Now, those are hard to address because it's you can't undo them immediately. So if I've gone 15 years without exercising regularly, I can't fix that today. So what you have to do is, and again, I quote this in the book, this hoary Chinese proverb, which is that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So with foundation regrets, the most important thing is that you look back on them, you treat yourself with some degree of kindness rather than contempt, you talk about them, you disclose them, and then you start taking small actions now, recognizing that you're not going to repair the damage immediately.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess part of it is It seems like you need a little bit of self-awareness there, right? To be able to address some of these things, like to understand that you
Sure.
have to move on, if you don't have self-awareness, do you think it's possible to really address some of these regrets in the right way?
I think that I don't want people. I think self-awareness is difficult and challenging. I think what people really need is a process. That is, don't rely on people's innate capacity for self-awareness, which is not massive. What you want to do is you want to equip people with a process. In the book, I talk about a process by which people can, deal with their regrets, systematic way to deal with regrets, and then ultimately to use them as an instrument for progress.
Okay. All right. And we'll talk about that process in just a minute. Okay. So we got the foundation part covered. What about boldness regrets?
Boldness are, that's regrets that people have about not asking people out on dates. It's regrets about people have about not traveling and going on adventures. It's regrets that people have about not speaking up, about not asserting themselves, about not starting businesses. As I said earlier, these are regrets if only I'd taken the chance.
Okay. And then next one, we have moral regrets.
Again, a lot of these regrets, as you know, they begin at a juncture. So, with boldness regrets, the juncture is take the chance or play it safe. And when people play it safe, they often regret it. When people don't take the chance, they often regret it. Not always, but a heck of a lot of the time, more than I would have expected. With moral regrets, the juncture is do the right thing, do the wrong thing. Take the high road, take the low road. And, it's always tempting to take the low road. It's always tempting to cut corners, to be less honorable than you should be. And when we do that, not all of us, but most of us end up regretting it. And the specific regrets in this category that had the biggest numbers were regrets about marital infidelity and about bullying.
Would the moral regret, and I don't know if you have data on this, but when you think about leadership or business, for example, is the moral regret piece the one that appears most common in a business setting?
I don't know. I don't think so, actually, and I'll tell you why. I don't. That's my real answer is I don't know. But I don't think so because moral regrets were the smallest category of all, and I think that what I saw most in the realm of careers were boldness regrets.
So I wish I would have taken that opportunity.
I wish I would have, if only I'd started a business rather than stayed in this crappy job. If only I had focused more on succeeding rather than on not failing. If only I had been more entrepreneurial in my career. Yeah. If only I had spoken up more at meetings.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then the last one, which I think are pretty self-explanatory, but we can talk about those anyway. Connection regrets. I think these are the ones that I perhaps struggle with sometimes, building closer relationships with family, reaching out to friends, having more of those deeper connections, which does require vulnerability, I think, to be able to really make those strong.
Yeah, I agree. So these are people though. But again, I mean, so I'll see your vulnerability and raise you awkwardness, because one of the things that stands as a barrier to connecting is our feelings of awkwardness. So if you and I were friends 10 years ago and we haven't talked for a while, I might say, I should really reach out to Jacob, but oh man, it's going to be really awkward. All right, so that's and I'm putting myself out there. So we think it's going to be so awkward. That's basically a version of vulnerability. It's going to feel really awkward, and besides, he's not going to care. And on that, coming back to pluralistic ignorance, we're wrong. We're wrong on both counts. A, it's not that awkward. It's very rarely anywhere remotely as awkward as people think. And B, the other side almost always welcomes the overture. I mean, 99 times out of 100. And so, so if there's a lesson in the connection regrets, it's that if you're thinking about reaching out, reach out.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the 4 types of regrets. I'm kind of curious so people who are listening and watching this, trying to figure out, which one of the regrets they have, I suppose it's pretty easy to identify. Are the steps different depending on which one of the regrets that you identify in yourself as far as what you should do?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think the big difference is the difference between action regrets and inaction regrets. Because with action regrets, you can take a slightly different approach. But again, some of these things group more readily in action and inaction. For instance, moral regrets tend to be actions. I cheated.
Okay.
I bullied. All right. And so with action regrets, one thing that you can do is you can try to undo them. You can make amends. You can apologize. You can make restitution. And so that's a way to extinguish certain kinds of action regrets. I mean, you can still draw lessons from them, but at the outset, you can sometimes do something about action regrets. The other thing about action regrets too is that you can do what's called a downward counterfactual, and that you can imagine how things could have been even worse. And we see this a lot in the data that I have when it comes to marriages. There are a lot of people in bad marriages, and so people say, "Oh my God, I can't believe I married that idiot," but at least I have these two great kids. So they find the silver lining. Now you can still draw lessons from your bad decision. You can still regret it, but you can ease some of the sting by using that at least. Inaction regrets, you can't undo them, and you can't at least them. You have to go through you have to go through, I think, through a very simple process that you can also use for action regrets. But again, to belabor the point here, action regrets give you a couple more remedies than inaction regrets.
What happens when you suppress them? This is one of the things that I think regrets. Like, this is one of the things that I feel like I've struggled with before. I think about a regret and I try to dismiss it, push it down, distract myself, don't think about it. And then I find that it like creeps up later on, and it keeps creeping up, and I keep trying to stuff it down and get rid of it. Why is that not a good approach?
Because it doesn't work. Because you can't, what you're trying to do is you're trying to extinguish this flame, but now occasionally these flames will die on their own. But if the flame is still working, you can't extinguish it. You have to actually enlist it to offer some light. I mean, at the risk of sounding cheesy here, that again, the fact that you can't do that is itself a signal. The fact that it keeps popping up is telling you something. And so what it's telling you, if it pops up the second time, the third time, what it's telling you is not, hey, try to suppress this a fourth time. No, that's not what it's telling you. It's telling you, I have a message for you. I'm clarifying what you value, and I'm instructing you on how to do things differently. So go back to me, for instance. If I have kindness regrets, if I have regrets, interesting, it's a moral regret that happens to be about inaction, but leaving that aside for a moment. If I have regrets about kindness, about not, about seeing bad things happen and not doing anything about them, and the fact that bugs me 10 years later or 20 years later or 30 years later, that's telling me something. It's clarifying what I value, kindness, and it's instructing me on how to do better. And so that's why I do think, Jacob, that there are regrets that we have that end up dying and extinguishing on their own. So if I regret something, if I did something when I was, 22 years old, that maybe I regretted when I was 23, but today at my advanced age, I don't even remember it, let alone regret it. Whatever, that's fine. That's a signal that whatever that was, I don't really value it that much. But if I do something at age 22 or 32 and I remember it now and it bugs me now, that's a pretty strong signal about what I value. And it's a pretty strong knock at the door that I need to do something.
Just a reminder, this episode is sponsored by SAP Concur. Integrate travel, expense, and invoice processes into one seamless connected platform for complete visibility into employee spend. Learn more at concur.com. That's CONCUR.com. Part of regret, we talked about like feelings and emotions. I find that a lot of people have a hard time even identifying their feelings or identifying their emotions. And, there's something called the feelings wheel, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which kind of lists all the different feelings that a human can have. And I found that oftentimes when people just ask me how you're doing, the default is good, I'm fine. But that's not really an emotion or a feeling. Do you find that there's a relation between being able to, address or learn from these regrets with being able to know how to talk about your emotions?
Maybe. I think that I think what's important, and I think you see this in something like, cognitive behavior therapy, and you see this a little bit even in the writings of the Stoics, going back, way back, is that the ability to name something is important. The ability to name what is bothering you is a way to reduce its menace, big time. And we do this with we do this with little kids. I don't think well enough. So if a little kid is exploding and feels like somebody didn't treat them well, it's important to understand that what that person is experiencing is something called anger. And anger is something that all human beings experience. Nobody likes feeling anger, but you sometimes feel anger. So when you feel this way, I want you to think about what this feels like. That's something called anger. And when you feel anger, that, there are certain things that you can do with that. You can think about, why do you feel anger? You can actually restrain yourself from treating people poorly, because that's usually not the best response to anger. And so again, naming is, for little kids and for people like us, I mean, it's actually really important. And it's more important, I think, than we realize, for another reason, which is that emotions, by their very nature, are abstract. And so that's what makes positive emotions feel good and negative emotions feel bad. So when we name them, at least, and it's certainly when we even more systematically write about them or talk about them, we convert this abstraction into concrete words, and that makes it less menacing. Truly, anything that we name, by naming something, we reduce at least a little bit of its menace.
Yeah, I think a lot of therapists say, right, name it to tame it.
Famous, there you go. Better said than I.
Yeah, if you're struggling with something, you don't know the emotion, you got to name the emotion to be able to figure out what to do with it as a result.
Bingo.
I'm curious if you've noticed any differences as far as age. So I'm thinking about, for example, my regrets versus my grandmother, right? She's turning 85. She was born in Odessa, Ukraine, and she's had unbelievable things happen to her and her family, and just all sorts of tragedies. Have you found differences in how people of a different age approach and think about regrets, whether they're younger or older?
There's one big difference in age, with age and regret. It's a pretty profound difference, and it's this. When we are younger, say in our 20s, we have about equal numbers of regrets of action and inaction, equal numbers of regrets about what we did and what we didn't do. But as we age, that balance changes considerably. As we age, the inaction regrets take over. When you get to be in your 40s and even 40s and 50s, it's roughly 2-to-1 inaction regrets to action regrets. It's a big difference. Wow. It's one of the few very strong demographic differences that we've found. Not only in my quantitative research, but also in other existing research, especially in social psychology, has found this true. Over time, what gnaws at us are inactions.
And why is that the case?
Well, I don't think we know, but I mean, we can speculate. I think part of it is stuff we've already talked about, in the sense that if you have an action regret, you can make amends, So if I've hurt somebody, I can go say, hey, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I can't believe I did that. I want you to accept my apology, and maybe get forgiven. And that could end up not extinguishing it, but reducing it considerably. With inaction regrets, you can't, you can't undo them. I think that's a big factor. The other thing is that when we go back to our 4 core regrets, the most common regrets are regrets about connection and regrets about boldness. So connections regrets are the biggest category. Boldness regrets are the second biggest category, and almost all of those are inaction regrets. So substantively, regrets about connection and regrets about boldness are themselves almost always regrets of inaction. So that's another reason why inaction regrets tend to predominate.
And I'm assuming that we probably experience many of these regrets probably on a daily basis, right? It's not like something major needs to happen for you to feel a regret. You can go during the day, have a conversation with somebody and say, oh, I wish I would have said that, or I wish I would have done that. So we can have regrets all the time. So I guess let's talk a little bit about the process of what happens when you identify the regrets. Again, using myself as an example, one of the things that I struggle with is the should-haves, right? I should have said this. I could have said that. And I oftentimes replay a conversation in my mind or replay a situation in my mind thinking like, I should have said this or I should have done that. And it can be very annoying. It can be very frustrating. Sometimes you're trying to go to bed at night and you kind of like just replay what you should have done or could have done. So what's a better way? Help me, Dan. What's a better way to think about and process these regrets so that you can learn from them instead of just having them, eat you up?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. So you make a really interesting point about there are things that are kind of sort of like regret. It's like, oh man, I really regret having that burrito for lunch. Okay, but that's not, you're not going to think about that a week from now. What I care about and what gives us guidance are the regrets that linger for, years and years and years and years and years. If you are somewhat rude to somebody on the subway or at the coffee shop once, and you might regret that the next day, or the next hour, and then on that one maybe you just forgive yourself. But if you do that routinely and you say, God, I'm really an ass. I'm really acting like an ass. Maybe I should stop doing that. That's a different thing. So let's talk about what you can do about it. I think the most important thing you can do is as a first step is change how you frame the regret and yourself. A lot of times when we make mistakes of anything, of any kind, we tend to be very harsh on ourselves. We talk to ourselves in very brutal ways. Our self-talk is absurdly vicious sometimes. I mean, it's nuts. We talk to ourselves in ways we would never talk to anybody else. So don't do that. I'm not saying that you deserve more tender loving care or kindness than other people deserve, but you don't deserve less. So treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Recognize that your mistakes are part of the human condition. Again, I keep coming back to this idea that we think we're much more special than we really are. I used to think that these regrets about kindness I had were somehow singular, that, oh my God, I'm really a flawed person. It's like, I got these regrets about kindness and whoa, I'm really messed up. There's got to be something wrong with me. And then I get this database of 20,000 regrets. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so not special. There's so many people who have these kinds of regrets. So recognize that your missteps are part of the human condition. Also, the other thing I think is really important is that when we have a screw up, we often leap to the conclusion that this mistake that we made or this stupid thing that we did somehow fully represents us as human beings. That this thing that occurred in 1 minute of our lives on one day is the fullest and most accurate representation of who we are as human beings. And that's not true. It's a moment in your life, not the full measure of your life. So I think that can begin, that can arrest this kind of march toward rumination or this march toward always revisiting it. You can interrupt that with this practice of self-compassion. I think it's super powerful. And it's very easy to do. We just haven't taught people how to do it.
I was just going to ask you about self-compassion. I think, what's her name? Dr. Kristen Neff? Is she? I think she's the compassion expert. Yeah, and I know she has like a couple of compassion exercises that she walks people through too. So without self-compassion, it sounds like it's very hard to process regret and to turn them into learning moments unless you can be kind to yourself. If you're just beating yourself up and throwing yourself against the wall, and again, this is something I struggle with too. I tend to, my default is more of the negative self-talk than the positive self-talk. So it's something I'm trying to work on a regular basis.
So let me give you some advice. You know that old joke where a guy goes to the doctor's office and he says, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this." And the doctor says, "Don't do that." That's your solution, Jacob. Don't do that. And again, when you find yourself with that negative self-talk, you say, would I talk to anybody else this way? Probably not. So don't talk to yourself that way. And I'm not saying talk to yourself with utter tenderness all the time. And, what I'm saying to yourself is don't treat yourself worse than you would treat somebody else. Why do you deserve worse treatment than everybody else? There's no logical reason for it, right? You deserve the same treatment as everybody else. So treat yourself with the same way you treat somebody else. The other thing to appeal to the very rational side is that there's a pile of think about something like self-criticism, the practice of self-criticism, particularly this kind of lacerating, vicious self-criticism. There's no evidence it's effective. If it was effective for you to trash yourself and beat yourself up, I would say go for it, man. But there's no evidence effective. So what it does is it makes you feel worse and it doesn't help you at all. So why do it? What you want to, what you want to do, again, I'm being very, you have to be very pragmatic and practical here. I just want stuff that works, right? And what works is self-compassion. Self-compassion interrupts that march toward rumination and spinning. And when you do that, you interrupt that march, you can begin other things to make sense of the regret and to extract lessons from it.
How do you practice self-compassion?
I try to treat myself a little bit better, and it's hard. It's not my go-to move. It's not my muscle memory. I'm not saying that I do it perfectly all the time, but if I say to myself, if I do something, I say, "You fucking idiot," and I say that to myself, I say, well, wait a second. Would I say that to anybody else? And there are very few people I would say that to. In very few circumstances would I say that to another human being. So why say it to myself? Yeah. I'm not, and again, I'm not going to the other extreme saying, "You're awesome. You're the greatest. You're wonderful." Self-esteem is totally overrated too. What I say to myself is, okay, you messed up. People mess up. It's part of the human experience. It doesn't define you fully. So make sense of it, draw a lesson from it, and move on.
Okay. And what's the next step in the process? Okay, self-compassion. We've done that.
So we got self-compassion. Okay, so we talked a little bit about disclosure. Disclosure is an unburdening, so that's important. But again, the other thing which we talked about too is the move from abstract to concrete, which we talked about in the realm of naming emotions. So what we do, again, emotions are abstract. When we talk about them or write about them, we make them concrete. And anything that's concrete is almost inherently less menacing than something that's abstract. And so that's, I think, a big factor in writing about our regrets or talking about our regrets. And then it also begins the sense-making process, because if I've written about my regret or talked about them, there's something out there beyond this blobby, amorphous, terrible feeling that I can try to make sense of. And when I make sense of it, I can move to the next step, which is drawing a lesson from it.
Do people usually
and the way to draw a lesson from it,
I was going to say, people usually do this via journaling, or is this all mental exercises that people go through?
It depends, because most people don't do it. I actually think that doing it only in your head is not effective, because that's still a little bit too abstract. What I think is important is to talk to somebody about your regret, disclose it to somebody else, even, and if you don't want to do that to another human being, because again, you're taking it out of the abstraction in your head and making it concrete with the words that you're uttering. That's powerful. That's a powerful way to defang the regret, and it's a way to open up the possibility of making sense of that regret. However, writing about your regret is also very powerful. There's a pile of research on this. So if you want something very tactical, write about your regret for 15 minutes a day for 3 days. That's it. So put some boundaries on it. 15 minutes a day for 3 days, and what's going to happen is that you're going to move it from the realm of abstraction to the realm of pure emotion to the realm of cognition. You're going to begin to be able to think about your regret, make sense of your regret, and begin the process of saying, okay, what lesson is this teaching me, and what should I do about it?
So it seems like that's the key, right? Because if it's abstract, it's very hard to figure out what to do about it. But if you can make it concrete, then you can kind of take steps and figure out what to do as a result.
Name it to tame it is one way of doing it, as you already said. But also, again, writing about it or talking about it, it defangs it. Here's the thing: emotions are abstract. That's why positive emotions feel good. Sonia Lyubomirsky has research showing that if we actually try to make sense of our positive emotions, if we try to explain our positive emotions, it makes them less positive, because we've taken it from abstract to concrete. So don't do that for positive emotions. Don't try to explain why you feel joy. Just feel joy. But when you feel regret, that's aversive. So what you want to do is take the abstract and make it concrete through words.
I also heard, I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody was telling me that also when it comes to emotions, instead of always trying to figure out why you're feeling a certain way, try to figure out what is making you feel a certain way. Because if you always try to put a why behind it, Yeah, because if you always try to put a why behind it, you might not know, and you might just kind of jump and guess and kind of, create all sorts of weird fantasies in your head. But but you can be very concrete about what made you feel a certain way, and that's something that you can change.
I think that's really excellent advice. And it's also another move from abstract to concrete. Because if you say, what are the situations in which I feel this way? That's an easier question to answer, and you can answer that question specifically and concretely in a way you can't. The why question, I think the why is often mysterious.
Yeah. And then how do you reframe this as an opportunity? So you're kind of going through this process, and I'm assuming like one of the things that you want to do after the regret is, what's the opportunity here? How do I transform this into something that can
You want to draw a lesson from it. You want to draw a lesson from it, and the way you do that is you take a step back and through something called self-distancing, and that's partly because once again we tend to be pretty bad about solving our pretty maladroit, pretty inept at solving our own problems because we're too close to it, but not bad at solving other people's problems because we're not caught up in all the details. So essentially you want to treat yourself like another person, which sounds weird, but there's lots of evidence on this. So talk to yourself in the third person. So don't say, what should I do? Say, what should Jacob do?
Yeah.
Ask yourself, there's a huge amount of research on that. Ethan Kross at Michigan has done a lot of that. Igor Grossman at University of Waterloo in Canada has done that too. So moving from the third person to moving from the first person to the third person is helpful. You can also do things I think like one of my favorite decision making tools ever is to ask yourself, if you're stuck, what would you tell your best friend to do? And anytime people hear that question, they always know what to do. Yeah,
no, I like it. Very simple and very effective. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I thought we could spend our last few minutes talking about how this applies in the realm of business and leadership. So obviously you collected a lot of regrets. You've been doing a lot of work and research on this. Have you been looking at how this applies to the workplace, how this applies to leadership?
Yes, in a number of different ways. So let's take boldness regrets. Okay, so here's the thing. So if these are the 4 regrets that people have, these 4 regrets offer us some hints about what people want out of their lives. Foundation regrets suggest that people want stability. Boldness regrets suggest people want growth and learning and richness, psychological richness. Moral regrets suggest that people want to be good. Connection regrets suggest that people want love, right? Okay. So if this is what people want out of their lives, why wouldn't they want it out of the half of their waking hours of their lives that they're at work? Why would work? I care about these things, but not during my work, not between 9 and 5. No, so what you want is that these regrets give us a reverse image of what makes a coherent culture, and so I think it gives leaders a lot of lessons. So let's take foundation regrets. Establish conditions of fair pay and predictability. Don't underestimate how much that people feeling precarious undermines their ability to feel good and to be good at their jobs. When I hear regrets about people saying, I wish I had spoken up, or I wish I'd been more entrepreneurial in my career. Some of that, a lot of it sometimes, isn't only on them. It's about being in environments and situations and contexts in which they didn't have psychological safety to speak up. So create psychological safety where people feel emboldened. I also think that if you think about moral regrets, I'm convinced that people not only want to work for great organizations, they want to work for good organizations. They want to work for places that are decent and humane and do the right thing. And then finally, when you think about leaders and connection regrets, a big part of why people work in places and get value and meaning out of places is that sense of connectedness, that sense of belonging, that sense of friendship. And so put a premium on those. So I do think that these regrets offer a kind of a reverse image for leaders about what makes a coherent culture. At the same time, I do think that there's a lesson for leaders in the boldness regrets, which is, I think there's a lesson in all the regrets, but certainly in the boldness, in the moral regrets is like, do the right thing. 99% of us, if we do the wrong thing, we regret it. And I think that's a good thing. I'm glad about that. I'm glad that people are tormented by moral indiscretions. I wish it was 100%, not 99%, because that 1% really messes things up for the rest of us. But I think with boldness regrets, there's a lesson for leaders too, which is that you should have a slight bias for action. that when people look back on their lives, they regret what they didn't do. They regret not taking chances. They regret not, stepping up. And so I think that especially in large organizations, there's so many pressures for, not trying stuff and timidity and risk aversion. And I think that good leaders need to push against that in their own leadership practices.
But obviously you're not going to go as a leader, you're not going to go up to all of your employees and say, hey, what are your biggest regrets? So would you,
why not?
Like what?
Oh, why? So why won't you do that?
I don't know.
Of course you could.
Maybe you
or better yet, don't do this. No, better yet, do this. Tell your team, next meeting you have with your team, if you're a leader, describe a regret that you have. Tell people what lesson you learned from it, and tell them what you're going to do about it. And watch what happens.
Yeah. So anyway, when I interview a lot of CEOs on this podcast, I always ask them for their greatest business failure or their greatest mistake. And it's amazing the stories that people are willing to share when you ask them those types of questions. Okay, so I like
that.
It's
exactly a very simple... right, because people do want to talk about this, and so. But the thing is that this is. This. It's every leader will tell you this, that people don't listen to what you say, that they watch what you do. So if they watch you disclose one of your regrets, find a lesson in it, find a path forward from it, they're going to do the same thing.
And I like that piece of advice. It's very simple and practical. So your next meeting, like you said, I'm asking about the regrets. I wonder if another piece for leaders could be to try to get to know your employees more as human beings, not just as workers, like their passions, what they care about. Do you find that an important aspect for the leadership piece?
I think it can be helpful. I think it depends a little bit on. I think it depends a little bit on the person. Like, not everybody welcomes that kind of get to know you. But I think if you read the room, you can figure it out. Okay,
I like it. And maybe last question for you: do you do any kind of prioritization for the regrets? Because if you're going through a lot of these and you have quite a few regrets that you're dwelling on, how do you tackle them? Do you just go one at a time systematically? Do you process these in any kind of way or prioritize them in any kind of way?
I'm not sure. My best advice is pick one.
Pick one and start with that.
Yeah, just pick one and start with that and see what happens.
I like it.
I don't have a systematic way to prioritize. I'm going to say boldness regrets are more important than moral regrets, or it's like your mileage will vary, and based on today might be different from yesterday, which might be different from tomorrow. The person you are today might have different regrets than the person you were 10 years ago. So my best advice, since people tend not to do anything, is to do something. Pick one. Treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Disclose to make sense of it. Write about it. Talk about it to make sense of it. Take a step back and say, what did I learn from this, and what am I going to do?
What's your next book going to be about?
I have no idea.
Still planning on that one?
Not even planning. I haven't even gotten to planning.
Yeah. Still early stages. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me. Let people know, where can they go to grab your book? Anything that you want to mention for people to check out?
Well, you can find the book, The Power of Regret, wherever books are sold, online or in stores. What's more is that you can find anything Pink related at danpink.com, DANPINK.com.
Yes, and as I mentioned before I hit the record button, I'm a fan of the Pinkcasts that you create.
Hey, thanks.
Are those once a month?
Twice a month, once every other week.
Twice a month, yes. Short, inspirational videos with very practical advice, oftentimes filmed in your house or around your neighborhood, as I've learned.
Often shot right where I'm talking to you, Jacob, right here at the beating heart of Pink Ink World Headquarters, the garage behind my office.
Very cool. Dan, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day. Really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning into today's episode. Please remember to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred channel is. I cannot express how important those reviews and ratings are to the success of this show, and they keep allowing me to bring back amazing guests. Lastly, don't forget to check out the brand new PDF that I just put out, which looks at the evolution of the employee. In other words, how employees are evolving and changing and what you as an organization should do to adapt. You'll get a complete breakdown of what that evolution looks like, as well as action items that you can and should be taking. That PDF is available at thefutureemployee.com. And if you want to reach out to me for whatever reason, whether it's inviting me to speak, sponsoring the show, or just giving me some feedback, you can always do so. My email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Again, that's jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.